2 quarters of contraction. What sort of confidence do you have that it won't be 3?
Well, look, we're obviously working to ensure that we can have the strongest possible recovery on the other side. The June quarter is clearly the quarter where we bore the brunt of the economic impact of the global pandemic, which is the coronavirus crisis. But if you look at the way Australia is performing compared to the rest of the world, I mean, a 0.3% contraction in the March quarter compared to 6 times as large a contraction across the OECD at 1.8% across OECD countries. Look, I mean, you know, we are in a better position now, both from a health point of view and from an economic point of view than we had feared when we were putting all of those various support packages in place towards the end of March. But you know, it's still a while to go.
We saw a lift in the household saving rate in these numbers yesterday up to 5.5%. So theoretically there's money to spend, but would you understand right now if households didn't have the confidence to go out and spend money?
Well, you know, clearly when a crisis hits like the one that we continue to experience, you know, people are more cautious and you know, that makes sense, that makes intuitive sense. But what we have seen over the last 9 weeks is 9 consecutive weeks of increases in consumer confidence. In fact, I mean, we have recovered 95% of the levels of consumer confidence since you know, its bottom. So, I mean, things are heading in the right direction, and the fact that we are winning the fight against the virus, the fact that we are in a much stronger position from a health point of view than countries all around the world, and the fact that economic restrictions are being eased at a faster rate than we might have anticipated earlier this year. I mean, all of that is contributing to a return of consumer confidence, and you know, clearly we would like to see that now reflected in increased consumption and you know, also increased business investment.
The Treasurer yesterday spoke about looking at JobKeeper and this $1,500 rate. If it were to be lowered, would it just be lowered for the people who that is actually a pay boost for, so people for whom that $1,500 a fortnight salary is higher than they usually get, or would it be lowered across the board?
Well, look, I mean, one of the issues that clearly we are going to look at is where people are, through JobKeeper, getting a higher pay than they ordinarily would have through their hours worked. But you know, I'm not going to preempt now what might or might not come out of a Treasury review, which is yet to be finalised, which is yet to be presented to government. And of course, we will also continue to monitor how the economic data evolves. I mean, we were dealing with a rapidly evolving situation on the way down in the period since the end of January. We are on the way, you know, back up. You know, in the sense that we've been able to ease these most severe economic restrictions, and we continue to progressively ease those restrictions. And so things are looking up. We'll continue to monitor how that plays out in terms of the economy as a whole, but also individual sectors across the economy, and we'll make judgments accordingly. But you know, it wouldn't really be responsible for me to preempt what judgments we will make in the absence of having more data about where things are headed, and in the absence of actually having those recommendations in front of us.
But for the people for whom $1,500 a fortnight might already be a pay cut or about their salary, so their salary or worse, is it unlikely you would lower that further?
Well, I mean, again, I mean, you're speculating. I mean, the objective ought to be to get as many businesses as possible back into a situation where they are able to pay the wages of their employee out of their income, rather than having to rely on you know, wage subsidies funded by the taxpayer. Now, when having said that, I mean, we're 2 months into a 6-month program. We, of course, will be sensible in whatever judgments we will make in relation to adjusting the JobKeeper scheme. But I'm not going to speculate about what it is that we can sensibly do in the absence of having reviewed the Treasury advice, which we will receive later this month, and in the absence of having reviewed a few more weeks and perhaps another month or so of economic data to sort of see how things are evolving. I mean, you've got to remember, I mean, the program is due to go to the end of September. We are at the beginning of June, so there's still another 4 months of this program to go. We're 2 months into a 6-month program, 1/3 of the way. If anyone had told you at the end of March that we would be where we are at the beginning of June in terms of the economic context, I think people wouldn't have believed you necessarily. I mean, people would have thought that you were too optimistic. So we are working to ensure that we get ourselves in the strongest possible position over the next few months, and let's just assess sensibly where we are, and we'll of course make sensible decisions to ensure that we can have the best possible transition into a strong recovery.
Okay, so in terms of taking a fresh look then, what about universities? Job cuts are beginning. La Trobe is even being spoken about as a university that could go broke. Is it time to look at whether they need special assistance, whether it be JobKeeper or something else?
Well, universities are able to access JobKeeper on the same basis as other businesses. There are obviously circumstances in which universities are able to access JobKeeper, but they do have reliable revenue flows from government. It's the non-government revenue side of the equation, I guess, that is causing many of them a concern. We will continue to monitor, in relation to that sector and in relation to any other sector, whether there are sensible things that we can do, but bearing in mind that there is significant government support provided to the university sector already.
Yeah, there is, but even with that, as I said, job cuts are here right now, and the future for La Trobe looking uncertain. So what you're saying there is a possibility of more assistance for universities?
Well, look, I'm not going to speculate. We are providing significant support, and JobKeeper is provided across the economy on the terms that people well understand, and we will assess the findings of the Treasury review when it comes to us later in June. The objective is not to move more people onto JobKeeper. The objective is to start returning the economy back to normal and to transitioning off this transitional support. This was always designed to be temporary support for the economy during a period which is a 100-year crisis event. Moving forward, it's a matter of normalising rather than going deeper into that sort of temporary support.
The construction stimulus package announced today includes home renovations. The minimum amount for the overall renovation, though, has to be $150,000. It seems hard to imagine someone living in the regions, house value might be $300,000, would go about such a massive renovation. Why is that threshold so high?
Well, it's got to be a substantial renovation, and we are working with the definitions of substantial renovation, in the GST legislation, and indeed the average cost of a new build is about $320,000 according to the ABS data for 2018-19. This is sort of just under half the cost of a new house. Look, we want it to be a substantial renovation so that it actually achieves the objective. This is about providing support by bringing to the residential construction sector across multiple trades, by bringing forward demand, and they are facing a cliff. There has been a 20% drop in demand. This is about bringing forward demand that would otherwise be delayed, and that's what the incentive is for. But it's got to be for an appropriately.
Sorry to jump in, Minister. Couldn't that demand still be stimulated by many more smaller jobs? That threshold will mean the vast majority of people won't go down that path, won't it? If it was a lower threshold, you might get smaller jobs, but more of them.
Well, we didn't think it was appropriate to fund at this level, kitchen renovations or paint jobs or whatever. This has got to be. The starting point here is this is for new buildings. Extending it to renovations is a stretch in order to broaden the appeal of this program. But if you do want to access this sort of support, a $25,000 grant, then it's got to be for as close as equivalent to a new build as is appropriate in the circumstances, and that is why the threshold was chosen.
Okay, and just finally, as you're working through COVID-19, I'm sure you're keeping a very close eye on the books. Will the government be looking to set some sort of debt cap, a debt to GDP ratio, to make sure this is manageable into the future?
Well, I don't think that artificial caps, are helpful, quite frankly, in the circumstances. I mean, in Australia, our debt levels compared to the rest of the world are comparatively low. They'll continue to be low despite the level of spending that we've had to incur through this period. But to put ourselves into artificial fiscal straitjackets would not do anything to assist the strength of the economic recovery on the other side. So we will continue to do what we have done over the last 6.5 years. We'll work as hard as we can to implement our plan for a stronger economy and more jobs. We'll focus on repairing the budget as soon as and as fast as we can. And of course, having returned the budget to balance in the 2018-19 financial year, we are now going to have to put ourselves back onto a pathway to get back there. And we will focus on keeping debt as low as it possibly can be and as low as it sensibly can be. But to impose artificial caps would make that job more difficult.